Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, attorney Sonia Madison. Sonia, how you doing today?
It is the end of a very stressful week,
It,
despite it
it
being
looks, it
April.
looks, it looks like it. I'm trying to figure
Oh,
out.
the hate is real. I feel like Hillary Clinton is like, man, I can do nothing right when it comes to looks. Men don't have to worry about this.
Shoot, speaking of which, she appeared on, I think it was on Jimmy Kimmel earlier this week, and oh, she was looking kind of rough. I was like, Hillary, what is going on? Years are not being kind to her at all. Good
You still
Lord.
don't learn.
Still, hey, listen, I mean,
She
we
looked
get judged
fine.
on our appearance.
On the record, she looked fine to me, viewers.
Well, she said something on there. I think that was somewhat controversial because I think they asked her what would she say to independent voters about their options today, and she said, "Get over yourselves." She's like, "You've got two options. Basically, one guy is an old man who can care about people, who's decent and who's doing a good job, and on the other hand, you got an old man who's got 91 felony charges against him, indictments." And so I think she was sort of like got in trouble about saying, tell them independent voters to get over yourselves. And I presume that does seem like it's a little harsh. So I don't think that she should be horribly offended if someone says that, the years haven't been terribly kind to her, if she's going to say these types of abrasive references and suggestions to American people as well.
Well, but we'll table that for another topic. But to your point, I think so. Part of that controversy is I think a lot of people feel as if they shouldn't feel restricted to the two candidates. And I've heard so many people say, "Well, I just won't vote," or "I'll write in a candidate that I want," instead of acknowledging, "Listen, this is not the election to go rogue.
Right.
You have two people here, and we need you to pick from those two." And I understand because I get this, and I'm sure you do, even within our family, people saying, "No, I don't feel like I shouldn't have to choose between a lesser of two evils," even though I don't think we have two evils going on. But if you feel that way, again, one is putting us in the brink of dictatorship.
You think we have one evil, not two?
I mean, we look at facts again, the 91 indictments. We're looking at someone who is very blatantly saying, "Hey, I will be a dictator and I will pretty much insert revenge against people that are going against me."
Mhm.
I think that's very clear where we are. But nonetheless, even if you want to say we've got a lesser of two evils, again, back in the 90s, I can hear that conversation over a Bush versus Clinton, but not right now. We've got two candidates. Please pick between the two candidates. And
Well,
don't
some people argue that there has never been a time more ripe for a third party in this country. When you've got 70% of Americans really don't want Joe Biden and 70% don't want Donald Trump, then you would think that this is I think those were the numbers or somewhere around that level. It seems to be a right time for a third party candidate. Of course, it's
Do
not.
you agree with that though? Because I don't think this is the right time for a third. I think it's too late.
I don't think that there has been a better time for it. When you've got two very unfavorable candidates, and both parties are are not excited about their candidate, putting a third party candidate in is probably a good option. Now the question is who do you put in as a third party? And you don't want to put a third party in it if it's going to tend to hurt the one that you want to win, whether that's on the Republican or on the Democratic side.
Well, and I guess that's where I'm disagreeing with you. I don't think the Democrats are seeing this as a person that they don't want. And that I think that's part of the conversation, excuse me, that often is getting missed. When we look at the things that Biden has done, I mean, he has eliminated some of the student loan debt. He has put in bills related to infrastructure. He has put in the first Black woman in the Supreme Court justice seat. He's done things that have been, helpful to the policies that he said he was going to do. And so this idea that, oh, the Democrats don't like him. I mean, I don't, the primaries not only speak otherwise, but I think people are so focused on the age, even though, again, he has put in advisors that have enabled him to make sure whatever decisions are being made are sound decisions. I just think we're allowing, and maybe this is the algorithm of social media, we're allowing all these conspiracy theories to overcloud the things that he's actually done.
Well, this is true, and I don't doubt that that's a key part of it. But when you start saying that, you know, his approval rating among Democrats is something I think about, I want to say somewhere around 54% or something like that. Even among Democrats, or at least their support, people who support.
And those are people that are actually putting in their polls, because I mean, to me, it's too early to look at polls right now. It really is, because it was so much
That's because
focus.
you don't like the answers.
No, 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 not that, because there was so much focus on the Republican primaries. I don't think the Democrats were forcefully putting out what has been done. And I think so many people were like, is Donald Trump really going to be the nominee? That really became more of a focus than the Democratic primaries. But we see that Biden has won overwhelmingly in the Democratic primaries. So
He has, but then by the same token, there have been 15% who are voting in the primary, up to 15%, or maybe no confidence, or whatever the alternative is, depending on the state. And so you start seeing, I think it started a lot with Michigan. And of course, that was in protest to his reaction to the Israelis' mechanism for fighting, and the tactics that they've been using in this war in Gaza. So yeah, there's still 15, 10%. Now, whether that's perfunctory at this point, or whether it's just sending him a message saying, hey, we want you to pay more attention to this, which he has done over the past couple of weeks, and have gotten a bit more firm with Israel about that, about their role in killing civilians, and not taking great enough care to avoid killing civilians, and providing humanitarian aid. Yes. So that message has gotten through to them. So maybe they were just sending a message to them. But there is still a large percentage of the Democratic Party who says that Joe Biden is too old and he should step aside and have another
I
candidate.
don't know
Now,
if 15% will qualify as large, but I will concede that there is a percentage that will question that. But I guess I'm also saying we're just so much inundated with a social media presence in which it's just a constant messaging of negativity, that I don't think a lot of people are informed of the decisions, the issues that Joe Biden has done. And so I just say I want to see, come the summer, when the Democrats are really going to be ramping up as to what Joe Biden has done. I think the last recent campaign, um, former President Trump was saying, hey, are you guys, or the Republican Party is saying, hey, weren't we better off 4 years ago? I mean, have we really improved for 4 years? And now I saw the Democrats' response was, well, let's look at what happened during the President Trump tenure.
4 years ago. Yeah, you don't want to say, "Are you better off 4 years?" Maybe you say, "Well, you're better off 5 years ago."
And let's look at what was happening when we was on the COVID. But also, again, like things when we talk about student loan debt, because what I hear is, well, I didn't get my loans paid off. Okay, well, let's put it aside the fact that there is unconcerted proof that there have been people who have gotten their loans excused. Well, let's talk about why he could not have done more. And if we look into that, we see it's because we had a Supreme Court that said you cannot do more, because you cannot excuse state loans that were disseminated, as well as some of the private. And so I'm just hoping we get more of an informed realization of what's going on versus the constant rhetoric.
But you and I know basically that the information that people get, when you say informed, it really means informed by Twitter or X, for the vast majority of Americans. And so, I mean, most people aren't doing deep investigative work to try to figure out. They're going off of what they heard, and they heard what they heard on their trusted news media source. And I don't know that we can fully rely on that. I mean, granted, Joe Biden's got some really good numbers on paper. Even just today, I think Thursday, they wound up releasing new job poll numbers, and I think it was like 300,000 new jobs that was just recently added to the economy, and that was 100,000 more than what they actually predicted. This is the fifth longest stretch of job creation and in history or in recorded history of for America. These are things that he can be bragging about. He's had consecutive and consistent, I think the longest running low unemployment of any other president. He's
Mhm.
had the most jobs created in the first year or first term of any president in existence. And so yes, there are a lot of things that he can tout to his credit. But you know, overcoming that media barrage of negative information is a challenge. And this is something that maybe now that he's focusing and getting out on the campaign trail, maybe he'll actually start seeing some improvement in it. But you just can't get rid of the age factor for him. And I think for many people, including in the Democratic Party, this is a big challenge for him on top of his response to Israel and this war in Gaza.
Well, that's why I'm imploring people to do their own due diligence because like you said, if you can't get rid of the propaganda or the conspiracy theories that are being shot out through social media, then as voters, you're not really making an informed decision. And to me, the biggest example was this past Easter weekend. I mean, so
Mhm.
many conservatives, Fox News, whatever, was going in on the fact that he recognized Transgender Visibility Day. Now, what they didn't say, because to me, the way they put it out was as if he started this and he started this for the purpose of it being in, contributing to Easter. But that's something that has been around for what, since 2009? I mean, for several years. It wasn't something that he started. And even, and not to mention that he also recognized Easter. But if you want to focus on, hey, he pretty much denounced Christ's resurrection by saying, let's recognize that transgender people are people too, which I don't think that the two are, in contravene of each other. There is a humanity that Christ made sure we recognize when it comes to this world. But again, if you want to allow social media to tell you how to think about that,
Mhm.
then to your point, I'm not sure what Biden can do on that because, and we talked about this, the algorithm in which you align will continue to spew those messages by which you align. You're going to have to
Mhm.
separate from that algorithm to find out the actual facts.
Well, which brings us to our topic today when we start talking about this liberalism versus and Christianity. As you mentioned, this I don't know if Transgender Day was actually officially recognized before 2021. I have to go back and I think it was in
Go back and look
I
because it's
think it was
been March 31st for years. This
uh,
is not the first year that this has happened.
but in terms of it being acknowledged officially by a U.S. president, I think he might have been the first to officially acknowledge it in whatever capacity that means, whatever that means. But in any case, this year happens to fall on Easter, and we have a lot of people who are in uproar because he's supporting transgender people, um, and on a day that's most holy to Christians, and it begs the question about how does liberalism and Christianity match, or do they? Are they antithetical? Are they supportive? Or what's the relationship between the two of them? I can tell you, I guess before I even get any of your input, I want to define, at least for our listeners, what one definition or two definitions of liberalism is. The first one would be a willingness to respect or accept behavior or opinions different from one's own, or openness to new ideas. That's one definition of that. And then from a social political standpoint, it says it's a political and social philosophy that promotes individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. Now, with those two definitions, I'm wondering why any red blooded American would criticize liberalism.
Well, and even if we're going into conservatism is equating to Christianity, because I don't know if people conflate the two, but if you want to conflate the two, Jesus came to pretty much thwart the traditions. And so we're looking at what is, to me, when I hear conservative, that's what I really hear is people wanting to say, hey, I want to stick to what's traditionally they've grown up to. Well, the tradition during the time Jesus came and the Pharisees made it very clear that he was thwarting their tradition was to focus on the rule, was to focus on Ten Commandments, Old Testament, and the like. And Jesus said, no, I have satisfied that. I want us to focus on using me to accept that the salvation is through me. By believing and accepting me, you have salvation. So it's not about comporting to whatever rules or the like. Now, that doesn't mean that you'd ignore it, but it's not about comporting to that, but it's about acknowledging that, hey, even if I was to satisfy every single rule, I still fall short. And so I recognize that there is salvation in the fact that I've accepted that Jesus Christ died because I continue to fall short. And so if that is what we as Christians accept, to me, that's a liberal concept.
No.
I
Well,
mean,
let me define here then conservatism. Conservatism, by the same token, would be considered a strict adherence um a commitment to traditional values and ideals with opposition to change or innovation. Now, maybe that sounds like it could be a biased definition. You got opposition to innovation, the holding of political views that favor free enterprise, private ownership, and socially traditional ideas. And so that's the political definition of conservatism. Now, interesting that you say that. I wrote a whole blog some years ago called it Jesus the Liberal. And the reason why I did that was because um, I heard so many conservatives really criticizing and really maligning liberals. Now, I get it's one thing to be liberal in your thought, to say that people should be able to live and choose how they feel is most appropriate for their lives. Um, and that our choice in Christianity should be just that, a free will choice, and not one that is prescribed to us by or forced on us by any type of laws, legislations, or societal mandates. I don't believe that Jesus wanted people to come to him under compulsion by the law. He wanted them to come to him under compulsion by love. He said, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. I won't have you force all men unto me. And so, even when Jesus was walking on the earth, he did challenge a lot of the traditional values of the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, as you mentioned, were some of the ones who really strongly adhered to traditional values. And the most sacred among those would have been like the Sabbath day. If you violated the Sabbath day, then they would have been like, "Oh my God, this is the most uh, horrific sin that you can commit." And so they even came at Jesus when he healed a sick man on the Sabbath day. And he's like, well, if which one of you, if your donkey didn't fall into a hole, you wouldn't go and rescue him because it's a Sabbath day. And so Jesus challenged a lot of those, even with eating meals with the unclean people, for the Jewish culture, sitting down at the table was a sacred time to actually eat together. And so when Jesus was found to have been eaten with the Gentiles, the conservatives, the Pharisees scoffed at that. And Jesus again rebuked them. You see in the scripture in the New Testament again and again how Jesus really rebuked those who continue to maintain the traditional values or the conservative values. And Jesus said, I came to bring a newness, to bring in um, new life, and that you can have it even more abundantly. And so that was the fulfillment of the law that Jesus called it. And so all they wanted to do was live by the letter. But Jesus said, I'm here to fulfill the law. And that was some liberty. And where the law of love is, there was a liberty. And so, yeah, I do think that liberalism has gotten a bad rap among many Christians because I think people perceive it to mean that if you believe people should have a right to choose their lifestyle, then that means you approve of their lifestyle. And that doesn't necessarily mean that. I think when I define liberalism, I think you have a right to choose one way or the other. And that doesn't mean that I support it, but I respect your ability and your right to be able to do so.
Well, I think, and of course, I know you'll correct me, but I also feel as if what gets conflated is the sexual orientation piece. And I feel as if people are so stuck on, well, the Democrats have permitted the same sex marriage. The Democrats have, again, we talked about transgender visibility. They've allowed a space for people that they feel as if is in contravening to what Christian beliefs is, while at the same time touting First Amendment and saying that should never be abridged, and all that. But to me, when I even look at scripture, the issue isn't your sexuality. The issue is about your actions. And so, even in that, if if someone recognizes, hey, I am attracted to someone of the same sex, and they recognize that, hey, that is, how they identify, but their focus is still on, hey, let me make sure that I'm still bringing awareness to Christ. Let me make sure, and to me, Jackie Hill Perry is one of the instant persons that come to mind that talks about how yes, this was the lifestyle I was living. And I don't think she ever says that I no longer identify as that. And Donnie McClurkin the same way. I feel like both of them have recognized, I'm not saying that that attraction is still not there, but what I'm saying is I have given that attraction, or I've given that, you know, I don't know what the word, but over to God. And so God is saying, hey, yes, I've made you this way. But if you give that to me, then I will continue to order your steps in a manner that is still conducive to what I have for you. And so, and to me, that's with anyone. Because even if you're a straight person, if you're straight but having premarital sex, you're no better than anyone else. We are all falling short in some shape or form or fashion, but he is asking us to give those desires, those pleasures over to him so that we can focus on what he's asking us to do, and not so much that we draw the attention or the focus on those desires that he is not asking us to pursue. And so that to me is such a big problem. And because to me, I have no issue with acknowledging transgender visibility, because to me, I don't doubt that someone has internally a desire to be, or has identified as someone other than their gender that they were assigned to. But to me, that's not the issue that Christ is asking us to essentially act as if it's not there. What he is saying, hey, acknowledge that that's there. You are visible. I see you. You are still my child. But now give that to me so that I can still tell you why I have created you in the way that I've created you, and that you are walking in obedience to what I'm asking you to do.
What does it mean to give it to him?
And to me, it's any submission. And I think it's easier to ask a woman, because that's what men are always say. Hey, you're supposed to submit to me as
Hey, listen,
woman.
I'm not saying that you all are expert submissors.
Hey, you asked me. But it essentially means to say, hey, acknowledge that that's who you are in God. Hey, I need you to tell me why you've created me this way, and what are you asking me to do going forward. I'm still submitting my life, my steps, the order by which I am living to you. And so if you submit to him, that doesn't mean that you're no longer transgender. It doesn't mean that you are no longer identified as homosexual. You still have all that. But what you're saying nonetheless is, despite all that, I am walking in the manner by which God has asked me to move. And that's why I say I use Donnie
And
McClurkin.
which manner is that? Which manner is that? Is that a manner of a man or a woman? If God created you as a man and you still identify as a woman, when you give it, quote unquote, give it to him, Do you walk in the form of a man that you were created in, or the woman that you feel like you should be expressed in?
And I think that's between you and God, because I also, for me, I don't see anywhere in scripture where he says, hey, listen, if you're a man and you feel as if you identify as a woman, then you have to pretty much remove all that because this is how a man walks. I don't see that in scripture. And in fact, I see a lot of women in scripture who he has still called them to move in a manner that some men may say are what they feel as if men should move. But to me, oftentimes what gets conflated between the two is really when it comes to family and sexual lifestyle. And again, I think the scriptures make it very clear. Marriage is between a man and a woman. And outside of that, I don't really care. I'm asking you not to engage in sex. Right?
Mhm.
So, you know,
So then it's a different standard for the homosexual then, for you, in
no,
your mind. You know, you might still be
not,
attracted to, you
not
might
even
still,
in that. No, it's not, because again, even if you're heterosexual, God has made it clear until you are married, you are not to engage in
okay,
sex.
that's fine. But if I'm a heterosexual married man, then the marriage bed is undefiled. But what if I'm a homosexual married man?
Well, again, I
Is
think
it is it is
makes
it
it clear.
undefiled still?
Clear, the scripture makes it clear that a marriage is between a man and a woman. So
So
to
then,
me, there is no marriage between two people of the same sex. But to me, that doesn't change the fact that, again, if you choose not, again, Donnie McClurkin said he identifies as homosexual, but he has given that over to God and saying, hey, I recognize when it comes to engaging in sex, or when it comes to marriage, that's not what God has walked for me, ordered for me. But what he has ordered for me is to put out my talent in the form of music, to put out my talent in the form of even taking this cross of which he has, created of me, to make sure I give to him. Because again, we all have something in our lives that is against what God has ordained as holy. All
yeah,
of us. I
yeah,
don't care
but we
what
don't,
your sexuality is. All of us have it.
but we don't all accept it as being free from sin. If I look at another woman and I'm married and I lust after her, I look at that, I view that as sin. I don't say that, well, this is the way that God created me, so I'm excused in doing that. No, it's something, granted, I think Psalm 51:5 says, behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. And David goes on in that same passage of scripture where he starts to say, you desire truth on the inward parts. And then he says, okay, so purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. So he recognizes, yeah. So there are some things that just the nature of me being born in the flesh makes me susceptible to certain types of sin. I was conceived even in sin, but it doesn't mean that I should be content staying in that sin. He recognized, hey, this is a propensity that I have, and I recognize that this is substandard than what you desire for me, even though I was created this way. Is less than what God desires for me. So I'm asking God day by day to purge me, to remove this sin, remove this iniquity from me, remove this lust for another woman, uh, from me, because I recognize that it's displeasing to God. So I don't have a problem with what you're saying in terms of those persons who may be attracted to the same gender, uh, sexually attracted to them. I have a problem when it comes to where you're acting out on it and you're tolerating that
And again,
that
my
affection.
say we all do that, because just as you have articulated, we are all falling short. We are all acting on something that is sinful to what we're supposed to do. And God is calling all of us to recognize, hey, you need to change, you need to be reborn, you need to look at what it is that you have done that is not holy, and revamp it so that it is by what I'm asking you to do. And so, and I know we're putting sexuality here, but I want to make sure it's very clear, because you look at David, when David lust after Bathsheba, I mean, that was clear, that was wrong. Clear that was wrong. And that is someone that was after, God's own heart. And God even told him through his apostle or surrogate, hey, I could have given you where you want it. But yet you chose to do something outside. You chose to take someone else's and do outside of me. And so I just want to make sure it's clear. It's not necessarily about the fact that you are attracted or that you were created to have a desire of someone of the same sex. It really is the focus of, hey, you give me that so that I can then use that to make sure you walk in direction of me. Because either way, if you don't do that, you will have a worship of this desire that is not of you. And I can't then use you to show the world how great I am.
Yeah, well, two things here. One, I can't ever say that God created us that way. We might have been born that way, but God didn't create us that way. I don't think that God would ever create a sin or
Well,
create,
he created Eve.
huh?
He created Eve and he created
He
Adam.
he
Both of
created them.
them are susceptible to sin.
They were susceptible to sin, right? But he didn't create you as a practicer of
Fine.
sin.
He created you to be
Yeah.
susceptible to sin, if that makes you feel better. He
Susceptible.
created
That's
you to
true.
be
We're all
susceptible to sin.
susceptible. I mean, we are all susceptible to there's not a sin on the face of this earth that you and I are not susceptible to. And I think we would all do well to recognize that. I call it my sock theory, and a lot of people don't like it because you calling the Holy Spirit a sock. No, but the reality is that the purpose of sock is that it covers your flesh of your feet. And sometimes you get socks that begin to sag. And when your sock begins to sag, more of your flesh is exposed. And so for some people, homosexuality might be at the calf, other people might be at the ankle, some at the toes. And so it's just a matter of how much you let that spirit and that grace of God slip from the grace of God slip such that it's not covering your iniquity, covering your flesh. And then once that grace is no longer covering it, then that sin becomes exposed. For another person, murder might be at the calf, and then another person
Another
at the
person,
ankle and at the
sex
toe.
in general, because I hate that we say homosexuality. It really is about sex in general, because to me, the focus
It's
is
not just about sex in general because
you have
you do
you
still
have
have
married
sex
men
that is
that go outside
sanctioned.
of their marriage.
You're,
You not married men, but
don't
just
say sex in general, say fornication.
fine fornication.
Because
That makes you
okay,
feel better.
so
But I
so
mean,
I agree with you on that one. And I'm not making an argument. I will not argue against fornication. I agree. You and I are 100% on board with that. So we don't have to make that argument because, like I said, even me lusting after another woman is just as bad as another man poking another man. Uh, and so I don't view those as different gradations of sin. But the problem with liberalism is that now they say you need to, or we're demanding that you accept this as normal for us. And that's
and I
where I
don't
think a
know if
lot of
liberalism is saying that. I don't even know if liberalism is saying that. Because again, if we look at Christ as someone who was a liberal, he's not saying, I need you to accept all this negativity of the world. He's saying, hey, listen, it's there. I need you to accept me, because that is the only way you're going to be free or have salvation from the fact that this all exists. And to me, especially when you have conservatives that are following Trump, you're following a guy who has had multiple murders. Again, multiple,
you
like,
cannot always win an argument by throwing Trump in there of values. You have to have a stronger argument than Trump. Trump is just like the wild card.
he is running for the highest position in this country. But I mean, when you look at all that, it's as if to say, okay, listen, it's not again about whether or not that you are, accepting that all this, sin is something that you should then fall in line with. No, it's about accepting that all that exists, all that you are susceptible to. And even when the laws that I have given you, you still will continue to fall short. So you need me in order to be saved from the desires that you have.
Yeah, well, the problem that a lot of conservatives see or feel, or the way that they interpret it, is that this push from liberalism is now saying if I speak out against homosexuality, in a similar fashion as I speak out against fornication. Okay. If I
But it's
speak,
never similar, but go ahead.
but if they started speaking out against fornication, then we'd still have the same problem. The truth of the
If they
matter is,
did, but that's the
if they did,
problem. They're
but
not
but
speaking out against it.
but the point is that there will still be a push from those who consider themselves liberals to to have me embrace that as normal, as same-sex parents as normal. They're teaching same-sex parents in schools as normal, and that's one of the reasons why you had this "Don't Say Gay" bill going down in Florida, was because a lot of people really strongly felt that you're trying to teach us and tell our children that homosexuality is just another way to live and that it's acceptable. It's okay to live that way. Now, you hear me defend it. You hear me making that argument. Now, I think it's lunacy, frankly, because I don't
Okay.
think that
It's your disclaimer.
yeah. Now, but that's their argument. Now, let me go ahead and argue against it anyway, since I made that point, because you're going to come back and you're probably going to
You
argue
know
it
I'm ready
anyway.
for it. You already know I'm ready.
Exactly. I don't even need you to think that this is the way that I think. But the point that I have is that in America, for me, I make a distinction between what is taught to my children as morals. I don't send my kids to school to learn about morals. I send my kids to school to function in this world according to the world and according to the rules of this society. So if the rules of this society says that you treat every person as equal and respectable, that's what you should do. Frankly, the rules of my faith says that I should love every person in the same way that Christ loved them. And so as a result, I don't have to go in and disparage someone because they live a different lifestyle than I do. Now, but by the same token, I don't want you telling me that I can't maintain my own personal beliefs and espouse my belief that I think that homosexuality and fornication are wrong. And because they are, and I will continue to say that
As
they are
well as
wrong.
heterosexuality outside the confines of marriage, right?
That's
As
what
long
that's
as
why I said
yeah, I know you
fornication. I said
fornication,
fornication.
but you also said homosexuality. You didn't just
Uh,
like
I did.
so,
Okay,
so-
homosexuality and heterosexual fornication. Jeez, but but when I say fornication, I'm implying heterosexual, since homosexual fornication cannot exist. I mean, any homosexual encounter, according to our definition of marriage being the confines of a husband and wife, any type of homosexuality is considered fornication.
well, I would say any. Again, it's the act because just because you identify as homosexual doesn't mean just your identification means that you are walking in a lifestyle of sin. Like I said,
Uh,
that's why I put in Donna McClurkin and Jackie Hill Perry. I mean, they identified as someone that may be attracted to the same sex, but they're not walking in that lifestyle.
And you don't think that my attraction to them or my lust after somebody of the same sex is the
Like
same
attraction and lust are not
homosexuality?
the same thing. Because again,
It is. The
even
script
as a
Jesus said it was.
I don't think Jesus does not say
Je-
attraction and lust are the same thing.
well, attraction and lust are the same thing. No, they're
They're
not.
not the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. And
So,
so, but that's what, but I just want to make sure there's a distinction. Just because you identify as homosexual doesn't mean you're walking in that lifestyle. No more than if you identify as heterosexual, doesn't mean you're walking in this lifestyle that you're just having sex with everyone that's of the opposite sex.
why would you why would you why would you as a Christian identify as homosexual?
If that to me is what you have recognized, hey, I'm attracted to someone of the same sex, and so I will never get married. That's why I say I use Donna McClurkin and I use Jackie Perry. I feel like they both, particularly Donna McClurkin, he recognized, hey, I'm attracted to of the same sex, but I also recognize that if I were to walk in that attraction by having actual sex with someone, fornication as you identified, that would be wrong. And to me, I'm focused on, for at least for our listeners, I'm focused more on the act than what you feel as if is a mental thing.
I
But
don't.
I also say, even in that, because I know we're talking about conservative and liberalism, it's not limited to Christianity. It's not limited to religion. Because if we look at conservatism as tradition, I mean, you've got a caste, a hierarchy system that went on in our government that had nothing to do with sexuality, or nothing to do with Christianity or anything like that. And when Trump talks about make America great again, he's not talking about, hey, let's make sure everyone that is married of heterosexual nature is what we're doing, or make sure everyone is back into a Puritan society. We know he's really talking about ensuring that that racial hierarchy maintains. And so even in that, again, and I think that's what's happening oftentimes when we're looking at what the Supreme Court has decided upon, when we talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, when we're talking about abortion, when we're talking about all these issues that are coming for the Supreme Court, they're not related to sexuality. They're not related to necessarily Christianity. What they are related to is this tradition or this conservative when it comes to American government that says, hey, listen, if you are 3/5 of a person, let's go back to you being 3/5 of a person. you know, if and even this whole concept that, oh, well, if race is considered at all, let's remove that, even though that was just a factor in a numerous of factors that related to admission into these universities.
I don't and I get where I hear you trying to move on to a broader definition of liberalism, but I do want to get this one point out, and that is that I don't believe that any Christian should ever identify him or herself by their sin. Because if you have I will not identify myself as an adulterer because I lust after another woman. That means that I accept then the sin that is in my life and that predominates in my life. Even though I don't act on it, I still accept that as being part of my character. No, that is not part of my character. I can identify as a black man, obviously, because that's what
You
I
don't
am.
identify as a sinner.
I
You don't
can I
identify as a
no,
sinner.
I don't identify as a sinner. I
Okay. I mean, I
identify
identify as a sinner that's saved by grace.
I'm
So,
not I'm not then you're no longer a sinner. You're no
yes,
longer a
I am
sinner.
still a sinner. I'm just saved by grace, but I am
Okay.
still a sinner.
But
You know.
you can identify you probably are.
That's me. That's what I
I
say. That's me. I identify as a sinner that is saved
but
by grace.
I do not identify by any of my sins because I know that I am an overcomer through him, and those sins do not overcome me as well. And when you identify, my own personal opinion is when you identify as a sin, that means that sin has greater power in your life because it defines who you are. And my sin does not define who I am. But the broader idea of liberalism, so as we were talking about before, so liberalism then still being that whole issue of being able to or having a willingness to respect or accept the behaviors or opinions that are different from your own. And so I think we have to really, again, still go back to that whole point of saying, I'm just saying, all I can do is I can accept that you believe this for yourself. Okay, that's fine. As long as you don't require me to believe it for myself and accept it for myself. And I think this is where a lot of conservatives are digging a hole for ourselves because we celebrate the fact that we have the freedom and liberty to exercise our own and vocalize our own beliefs wherever we choose to go. And we get to speak on Christianity and everything for years. And for centuries, it has been taught in the schools a lot of times. Christianity had been a key part of inclusion in school activities. Now they're upset over the past 50 years or however long it's been since they quote unquote took Christ out of the schools. Because the reason why they took it out is because the Constitution says the government shall have no respect for any particular religion, and so or shall not impose any laws with respect to it. And so if the schools are operated by the government, then the government shouldn't be promoting one particular religion over another. I get that. I don't have a problem with that necessarily because I want to be able to have that same liberty that everybody else has to be able to speak in their public place. But people don't think that. So if I can't talk about my religion in school, then I don't expect the Muslims to be able to talk about theirs or Jewish people to be able to talk about theirs. If I were Jewish or Muslim, I would and I couldn't speak about mine freely in schools, then I would expect that Christians wouldn't be able to speak freely about theirs too. So I think that's fair. But these are governmental things. I don't expect the government to be the arbiter of morality for me. I don't expect that. I expect the government to adhere to the laws that it's written. And sometimes those laws are contrary to what my own moral beliefs or my religious beliefs are. But guess what? I still expect the government to enforce those laws, even if they are contrary to what my own religious beliefs are. I expect you to live up to the laws that you write.
Well, and I don't know if this is us speaking the same language, but I really think when we're talking
God
about,
forbid.
I know, I really think when we're talking about, liberal and conservatism, I think the conservatism concept is equity is not important. And I think the liberalism concept is no, equity is. And to me, even if you put a Christian, antidote on that, I think Christ made it very clear, no, equity is important. There is no, because the Pharisees was like, no, I should be higher than someone else because I've studied the law. I'm walking into what I think is the law. And I have this title or this position that makes me better. And I think when we're talking about government, particularly when we're talking about Trump and what some of these make American great concept is to say, hey, listen, I'm sick of this equity argument. I'm sick of us talking about why that for history of however many years we've oppressed the people and now we need to put in mechanisms to make them whole. I'm sick of us talking about immigrants who are trying to come over here to get a better life because I should still be considered better than them. I am sick of talking about even when it comes to people that are oppressed by virtue of transgender or by virtue of them saying, hey, listen, I have been beaten because of a certain lifestyle that, no, listen, I don't care because, hey, this is a capitalist society. And unless you have a certain amount of money or unless you have a certain amount of status, then you're not worthy or you're not deemed to be protected by this American society. And to me, that is what this conversation really is about, this tradition of, hey, listen, white people or people of a certain money, people of a certain title should maintain a hierarchy. And just because there's been a history of oppression of certain people doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my hierarchy to make sure I make them whole.
I don't know what to say about that. I'm not sure I understood it all, but
Well, and let me know where you're confused because and definitely encourage people who are still
but what are
confused.
you calling what are you calling conservative in that? Are you just
Again, the
talking about
conservatism is that white people have always made the dominant race, that capitalism, if you have the money, you have the power. If you have the title,
but
you have
nobody
the
ever
power.
articulates that that's what they're really trying to do.
That may be articulated, but that's what's happening. When you look at DEI going to the Supreme Court, when you look at people being 3/5, when you look at even a conversation on reparations, what people are saying, hey, make America great again, is, hey, put us back to this situation where it's all about what are you bringing to the table? If your title and your money is not something that I find of value, then I don't care if I've oppressed you for years. I should not have to make you equitable to me. And to me, when we're talking, even the conversation when it comes to immigrants, the fact that we are a country that pretty much had immigrants take away the Native Americans who were here rightfully first and sit here and say, hey, listen, I don't want to put in legislation to make a pathway towards immigration, or I want to make sure anyone that is not through documentation lawfully here, I want to push them out. That to me, it goes into this conversation of, hey, no, what you really want is to say, unless you are bringing something of value that I consider a value, whether that's through money or title, I don't want to hear, I don't want to create any pathway to which you have an equitable ability to be sufficient, productive here in society.
But that's not the argument they're making. They're making the argument
We
that
will agree to disagree
DEI.
on that.
Let me
We
let me
will
let me.
agree to disagree on that.
I haven't even made the argument though. I haven't even stated what their argument is. So
I
you're
know,
going
but
to disagree
your
before
first
even
sentence
hearing it.
said that's not the argument they're making, and I'm saying, well, I agree, disagree on that because that is exactly the argument
That's
they're
your
making.
interpretation of the argument.
Which is
Now
why
the
I said, oh, that's why, which is why I said
the
it is.
legal argument. What's the legal argument
Well, to
that
me,
they're
even the
making?
legal
Okay, let's
argument,
talk about
because
that.
again, when you look at when Trump first got into
The
office,
written
one
legal
of the
arguments.
I know that's what I said. When Trump first got into argument, he put in these executive order that said, "Hey, Black, Brown, you cannot travel in here from out of state," and he pretty much
I'm
was
talking
trying
about
to
for
prohibit
DEI,
for.
against DEI. What's the
Well, I mean,
legal
I did,
argument
but
against
you started
DEI?
with everything that I said, so I was like, let me start there. Okay, but
So
even with DEI, when you look at this, the Supreme Court decision that related to that, they essentially said, "Hey, I don't even understand what this concept of diversity is. I don't even understand this issue that relates to how someone of a
that's not
different
what they
race."
said.
Go read it. Go read it. I'm encouraging you to go read it because clear as time has made it very clear. What is diversity? Like, why are we even talking about that? So go read it. And I think that's, again, we talked about this before. People are not reading these decisions.
But what's the argument?
But
That wasn't the argument that they made.
but
But
even
go ahead.
but that's what I'm saying. Go read it because he made it very clear. Diversity, this crazy concept. I don't even know what that means. But the fact that they said, hey, let's remove race as a factor. Race shouldn't even be considered when that was just a factor. It was no determinative factor. And when you look at Ketanji Brown Jackson's opinion, she made it very clear. Hey, when you're talking about race, you're also talking about the history that comes based of this country based on people and how they've been treated because of how they're viewed by their skin color. And the fact that still that
Okay, so
decision
you're not
still
stating
said,
the argument. You're not stating the argument is that to offer benefits to anyone based solely on the basis of their race is unconstitutional when
and again,
race
did you
and
not hear
ethnicity
anything that I
are
said?
I heard what you're
And I
saying,
just made it
but
very clear
but
that no school was
but
arguing
that's just to
anything
you.
based solely on that. That's what I'm telling you. None of the schools made it solely on that. But what the Supreme Court did was made it seem as if that was what they were doing. And that was actually wrong. But that's what I'm saying. When you're looking at conservative court, they're going to skew it to what they are saying is happening when that's not happening
Whether
at
it's
all.
this, you don't have to wait for it to happen in order for you
What do you mean?
to
Wait for it?
create a.
Wasn't
You
happening
don't
at
have to,
all.
but
It
you don't
wasn't
have to.
happening
That's
at
the
all.
point. I'm saying you don't have to wait for it to happen to write a law to prevent it from happening. And
I
so,
don't even know if you understand what you're saying. Again, if they're
I do understand.
recognizing, no, you're not.
You don't have
If
to
you
wait till the
have
murder
schools,
happens to write
if
a
you have
law
Harvard
preventing it.
making it very clear that, hey, we're not doing this, but that is just a factor, but you still have to have a certain test score. You still have to make sure that you can articulate X, Y, and Z. That is just a factor. In the Supreme Court, who is a conservative court, and we're talking about conservative versus liberalism, is a conservative court that has said, hey, I hear what you're saying, but forget it. I'm going to say that you're making a sole decision on race.
Or
Well,
you,
then
it's not even. I don't think they even said
you
it had to be sold.
completely
They
removed
didn't
it.
even. I don't
That's
think they
what
even
you just
mentioned that.
said. But
I
that's what
don't
you
believe
just
that the
said.
argument was that there was a sole decision. They said that
I'm
race
just saying what
cannot.
you just said.
They were saying that race cannot play a factor in the decision,
And
particularly as it,
again, even
particularly
fine,
as it.
fine.
May I
Even on
speak?
that,
May
but
I
that's my
speak?
point. Even
May
on
I
that, that's
speak?
wrong.
May
That's
I
wrong.
speak? If the Constitution says that race is a protected group, then you should not necessarily make a decision in favor of or against another person based off of their race. And so race should not necessarily be considered. Now, they did come back and say that you can consider other hardships and other things like that independent of race. And if you start looking in America, the big issue with race was not necessarily just the color of your skin, but it was the social economic impact, the political, social, and economic impacts that being of a certain ethnicity had on you. And so, yes, you can still introduce the impact, the social economic impact, and adverse reaction, adverse events or adverse um,
Yeah,
positioning that
please
you've
go back
had.
to the decision because
The,
you're
the,
you're completely like misrepresenting everything.
I'm not
Go
completely
back and read
you
the
don't like my representation, but this is the argument that
I'm not gonna
conservatives are
lie.
making. This is the
But that's
argument
what I'm saying. You
that
go read those,
conservatives are making.
go read those previous decision, Gersher, all that related to affirmative action programs, that related to similar use of race as it related to college admissions. And to me, if you read those decisions and then you read what the Supreme Court is saying, and we're talking about liberalism versus conservatism, again, the conservatism is, hey, I want to go back to, I want to ignore anything that relates to how we've treated people in history and how that has affected them going forward. And the reality is, how we've treated people based on race has affected in a generational sense. And so
Right.
even this argument
So
that
those are the arguments. Those are the basis
even this
upon
argument that you're
which.
saying, oh, using the equal protection and saying, hey, if we use race, then we are pretty much discriminating against people of someone outside of that race. Well, that's wrong, because you weren't discriminating people against someone outside of that race, because the reality still remained, and that was even in this decision, that people of white race were still, with lower test scores and were not, were still being admitted at a higher rate than people
Was
of
that wrong?
minority race.
Was that wrong?
The decision was wrong. Yes, I
No, no,
agree.
no, no, no. I'm saying, is it wrong for people of white race with a lower test scores to be admitted over black people with higher
Again,
scores? Is it
I
wrong?
that's what I say. As an attorney, I would need to look at the totality, because to me,
Again,
I would,
as an attorney, you just
I
don't want
would,
to say
because
that it's
I
wrong. The
agree.
reality of it is
Again,
that
I agree there should be multiple factors. If someone of a lower score but has socioeconomic factors, that, again, diversity is not just about race. So if someone has a lower score that has socioeconomic factors that would warrant them being there, or has a very high, proficiency when it comes to a certain area of expertise that this school offers, I'm not going to say just because they scored on an SAT means that they cannot be there, because they're still highly proficient when it comes to music or math. And
right.
so,
So you're identifying the other socioeconomic and other factors that go into it, but those are independent of race. Granted, race might have helped predict what some of
some
those
are, some aren't.
interactions would be. Huh?
Some are, some aren't. But again, no school was saying race was the sole factor. Because
Nobody, of
again,
course not.
right, but
But
the Supreme Court,
schools
as
were
you
saying,
articulated, the Supreme Court made it seem like, no, y'all are making race a sole factor, and that's not it. And I'm so saying,
schools were saying,
when we're
schools
talking about liberalism versus conservatism, I'm saying what these conservatives are saying, oh, race is a sole factor. No, it never was. It's not even now, but you can't ignore
okay.
that race has played a role in how
Okay,
people
so we got
are
about
the
two
people
minutes
they
left.
are.
So let me get a couple words in here. So, yes, race was a factor that certain schools said that we do want to have a quota of this
They didn't
percentage
say
of
quota.
Afro,
They did
or
not say
what may
quota.
not have been a quota. They set limits and said, hey, we want to have a diverse population that looks like this. If we can actually get this percentage, and some of them have actually set percentages of certain races, certain underrepresented minorities, and whether those were female or ethnic minorities, they did set percentages. And if you set a percentage, whether you say it's a quota or not, it's a
Not a
quota.
quota.
It's
It's
a
fine.
whether you say if that's a goal.
Look
Okay,
in the
let's
definition
say
of
it's a
quota.
goal.
I know you
Let's
want to talk, but I don't want
let's
you to spit
let's
things that
say
are
okay,
wrong.
let's say it was a goal. Well, we have a goal of reaching this percentage of ethnic and gender diversity.
That
And
will not
so
be hindered by the making sure that the most qualified people are going to this school.
you know, that's an opinion, but unfortunately there are people who have an opinion that it will.
Yes,
and
conservative.
you can rest assured there have been people, there have been opportunities in the past that were given to unqualified white people over black people, because
Overqualified black people.
overqualified black people, right? Now, there have also been, and that was wrong. You and I will agree that that's wrong. Now, it would be equally wrong to give a position to an underqualified black person over an overqualified white person
Right.
based
And
on the
any of that
surface of
was
his
presented to
color.
the Supreme Court, I would agree with you. But the Supreme Court made it clear that all the sets that were presented, the black people were still in the middle when it came to the SAT scores, when it came to other factors. So the white people were still scoring less that were admitted than the Black people that were in the middle. So
And
who is underqualified here?
it's
Or,
well,
or the minorities? I shouldn't use
so
Black.
then it doesn't have an effect in us, right? If that's the case, then their decision has no effect on us.
What is it? Their decision. Their decision had
The
a complete
Supreme, it
effect.
doesn't have, how does it have an effect if you're already more qualified as a Black person and you're still getting in those
No, it's
positions,
not about more qualified. You
or
were
equally
qualified.
qualified
You
or
were
whatever.
qualified. But what there was arguing, because again, you had Asian Americans that brought this lawsuit. And so they were arguing that, hey, listen, I was more qualified than some of these Black people. And so instead of saying, hey, I was more qualified than these white people that still got in based on legacy or based on, monetary contributions, instead of making that argument, they said, hey, I was more qualified than the Black people. And so by virtue of me not getting in, then that was discriminatory. Again, that's what I'm saying. Make sure you understand the facts, because again, in that, what you're still saying is, hey, listen, despite the fact that these white people were less qualified than you, you're focused on the fact that they admitted these Black people.
Well, let me say this with regard to our topic today as we close. Liberalism and Christianity, the truth of the matter is that within our Christian faith, we know that there are things that we are given that we're not qualified for and undeserving of as well. And even in that regard, we should not we should not necessarily disparage someone who has gained favor for whatever circumstance that it is, But I guess if you disparage if you disadvantage another person to give one person favor, maybe that's where the problem lies. But you can't be a Christian and not be very supportive of favor, because we all know that sometimes just our stature of being in good standing and right standing with God offers us favor. And so, from a legal standpoint, we can't. Maybe I don't support it from a legal standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint, hey, I'm grateful for it.
You're grateful for mercy.
I'm grateful for favor, and I want every bit of it that I can possibly get.
Well, while you produce, I mean, my last thing is, again, to just make sure it's clear. Listen, if we're talking about liberalism and conservatism, if the definition of conservatism is, hey, we're focused on tradition, then I'm saying, hey, listen, tradition has put us in a place where people are not treated equitably. And so if we're going to continue to support that path by voting for Trump or we're voting for Republicans, what we are essentially saying that history doesn't matter. And that the fact that, even as someone of color or whatever, you were brought into this world of disadvantage, where someone else who is of a majority gets the privilege just by being of that. If we're going to ignore that, then, hey, that's the American society that we're in. But if we acknowledge that, then, hey, that's the liberalism that is in effect, as it not only relates to, I guess, the American society, but also Christianity.
I don't think that equity is a biblical concept.
Another day, then.
Topic. I do agree that
I think mercy is
I,
what is the back that he's making all of us equitable.
that's true. I don't think that equity, as we define it here in America, is a biblical concept. I do think that the Bible does strongly speak against injustice. Now, I think there's a difference between that. Maybe we'll have that for another discussion.
Because I don't even, the wheels are already rolling. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he said that. Anyway,
tune in next week to the
right,
Roundtable Consult,
so that Mark can tell us how we earn our way into heaven. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are here every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. We were also on your favorite podcast platform, so make sure you are following us there. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to us on YouTube and you catch a repeat of this episode on Star Radio. So until next Saturday, thank you guys so much for tuning in.